a little bit of what I wanted to cover at the beginning is just what leadership is, you know, in essence. And you know, I think a lot of times we don't realize that we're in a leadership position or a leadership role right away. And it could be, I mean, we may have a business where we don't have any employees. And we're thinking, well, you know, I'm not going to be leading the team. I don't have employees and what have you. But if you think of your leadership role in the sense of your interactions with your business partners, your other business relationships, your vendors, your clients, helping to facilitate, helping them to learn something about your product, or helping them to learn to use the product if you have to train them. So now you're in a leadership role where you're training your client. So you don't necessarily have to have employees to be in that leadership role. But essentially that leadership piece is talking about, you know, guiding other people, helping them use appropriate initiative to learn new things or to grasp things that they need to learn. It's the art of getting others to do things that you want done. So, you know, in Sarah's case, you know, you may be teaching one of your employees how to prep the salads, right? And as a leader or a business owner, a lot of times when we do take on employees, we don't get to do the fun stuff anymore. We don't get to make the salads anymore, right? We're getting other people to make the salads. So there's, you know, there's that part of it is, you know, when we decide to be that leader, we are getting the work done through other people, basically. Being a good leader inspires others, taking people where they need to be, up to the next level or up to that next skill or that next challenge. So there's a couple of quotes that I wanted to give you today, and one is from the first one's from President John Quincy Adams, and he said, "If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you're a leader." And then another one from former First Lady Rosalind Carter said that a leader takes people where they want to go. A great leader takes people where they don't necessarily want to go, but ought to be. Right? So helping them realize what that direction is and helping to guide them in that direction. Kayla, could we go down to the next page, please? So having, you know, having a vision as a leader, simplifying, helping people to understand what needs to be done so they can understand what that process is. Growing others, as I mentioned just a minute ago, is very key. A couple more quotes for us to think about today. So General Colin Powell said, "Great leaders are almost always great simplifiers who can cut through argument, debate, and doubt to offer a solution everybody can understand." So in a lot of ways in our leadership role, we are serving as the referee, right, in a lot of situations. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in our program today about conflict resolution and how we approach that and how we handle some things surrounding conflict in the workplace, because there is that reality that there's going to be some disagreements. There's going to be some times when people don't see eye to eye in the workplace, and how do we handle that? The other thing that great leaders do is to help people realize that they were able to achieve things themselves. They have ownership in that particular process or that project or that accomplishment. Jack Welch, the CEO of General Electric, said, "Before you're a leader, success is all about growing yourself. When you become a leader, success is about growing others." So we're going to talk quite a bit about growing others today. Building a personality beyond its normal limitations, so to speak. Okay. And when we look a little bit further into leadership, on our next page, we can see that there's a slide here that talks about leadership and power. So sometimes people confuse leadership with power, and a lot of times as leaders, we're portrayed as hard-driving, hard-nosed, headstrong, and many good leaders have those qualities, that's for sure. but it takes both force and influence to lead each other or lead others effectively. So those two approaches can complement each other to create a really powerful yet adaptable force for action. So good leadership will always balance power and influence, okay? So for example, good leaders have to be both commanding and understanding. A leader needs to know how to take command and when to take command of a certain department or work group. At the same time, being aware and understanding, taking the needs of each group member into account, right? So one of the things that I think about in that sense is worked with a management group where one of the leaders was a fire chief. And that command and control had to take place really quickly in those crisis situations, right? So that leader had to assume that role and be very assertive and very confident in what they were having the other people do on a crisis situation. So not only do we direct others, but we consult with them, right? We need to be able to direct those operations and activities, but also to be able to listen to others' ideas and opinions. So again, we develop that balance between ordering and asking, all right? And not so much giving orders, but giving directives, giving that direction and that guidance where it's needed, being firm when we want to and need to do that. And then knowing when it's more effective to ask for cooperation. So when we look a little bit deeper into leadership and power on these next couple slides, we want to see where those leaders can not only be very headstrong, authoritative, and so forth, but also be yielding and flexible as well. I'm wondering if I can, oh, I don't know if I guess my button won't forward this slide. So, so we talked about that, having that balance between commanding and understanding, right? Having that fire chief take charge when he needs to take charge or she needs to take charge, right? Consulting with our employees and asking for their input as well, right? Being open to that. And then also making sure that we know when it's more effective to ask for cooperation, right? Sometimes we have to be very specific in asking for that cooperation from the employee to be able to be effective. So when we've got those things going on, we also have a couple other things that might happen with leadership and power. So we need to be striving towards those goals, you know, making sure that we're moving all in the same direction. I like to use the analogy of the team of horses is all pulling the wagon in the same direction, right? So looking for that success. But we also need to know when to go around a barrier rather than trying to break through it, right? We have to be flexible, just like the best athletes out there, right? Knowing when to stand firm and when to bend. Finally, sometimes we need to, you know, rely on influence. We have to be able to control certain situations, but we also need to know how to facilitate and work from within the group and even behind the scenes sometimes. So when we think about that and how we can be an influencer in our workplaces, we need to be very strategic and intentional about our leadership style. So like it or not, we're role models. Excuse me, we're role models. Employees watch how we speak and how we act, how we handle tough situations, what you believe in. Your purpose as a leader isn't simply to get the direct reports to work together towards reaching a common goal, although that is that is important, but also think about how your attitudes and behaviors form that backdrop for how the work gets done. So employees really do look to us as leaders, and we need to truly believe in our company's vision and mission. They will identify with that cause. if you can articulate it, if you can spread the values throughout the organization in a very specific way, if you want your employees to create a results masterpiece, we need to provide the right culture canvas for them to be able to create that masterpiece. So being strategic and intentional about your leadership style can help create that environment. It produces highly enthusiastic employees that produce at peak levels. So that's really kind of what we're after in being a quality leader, right? You know, absolutely. Learning to be good with people, appreciate diversity, understanding that we have to have our own inner high motivation to be able to do that, right? To inspire ourselves even when the going gets tough. We have a competency level and knowledge and skill level that maybe not our employees all have at that level, right? And so we can share those things as well and mentor others. And when we talk about being wise, we mean that we need to have good judgment and use it to make good decisions, even under pressure, right? Having grace under pressure is one of my mantras, and being able to stay calm. If we get escalated, if we get agitated, our employees are going to, their agitation level is going to rise along with us, right? We need to be farsighted. We need to have that vision and be able to see the possibilities where maybe our employees only see the problems, right? And being able to bring that big picture into focus for our employees on a regular basis. Absolutely, we're action oriented, right? When we see something that needs to get done, we do it. Good leaders will enjoy those challenges, right? And we can handle uncertainty and adapt to change. So being able to roll with those punches as a leader, again, being that role model for our employees so that they can see, hey, we can be adaptable, we can be flexible in how we adapt to those changes, those unexpected things that come up every day, right? When we're trying to you know, prep all the salads and so forth for all those orders going out for the day, and we didn't get our lettuce delivered. What do we do without lettuce today? Right? So we got to roll with those punches once in a while. And we're very persistent as leaders, right? We can deal with that adversity. We can really get through that problem solving well. We don't believe in giving in or giving up. There's always a solution. There's always a workaround that we can look for, right? And we trust in our own ability to get the job done no matter what. And I think those are really important qualities to be able to convey to our employees. We can teach employees that persistency, that flexibility, that problem-solving attitude or approach to, hey, things will happen that are unexpected, and let's be ready for it when it does happen, right? So those are some pretty good qualities to have, and absolutely, you know, this laundry list that we see on this screen, right? You guys all know this: being positive, being respectful, being committed to the common goals, right? That credibility and trustworthiness, I think, is super, super big. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail today. But when we look at, you know, can leaders really, you know, influence the culture of the organization? Can that be something that we as leaders really accomplish? And I truly believe that we can. And there's a couple of things that we want to establish, you know, as a leader, and that's being connected with the other people that we work with and through, right? I think that connection is really key for us. So, you know, in addition to all of these great things that we see listed on the slide, we want to have that connection with others in the workplace. So when we take a look at leadership styles, like I mentioned earlier, we need to be strategic and intentional about our leadership styles. That can really play into the culture of the organization and the success of the organization as well. And setting that tone for our organization's culture comes from our leadership style. It's up to us, right, as leaders, not only to establish goals, the overall direction, but also decide who gets a voice in the process, how things are implemented. And when we're assessing how to refine our company's culture, we need to consider the leadership style, and we really want to define that culture and that style, right? So there's different styles. There's servant leadership, there's participative leadership, transformational. All of these encourage collaboration and open exchange of ideas. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then on the other hand are the directive leadership and authoritative leadership styles that provide that clear direction, that purpose. They're rewarded with consistency and predictability. But that piece can also hamper and create a lack of collaboration or a lack of innovation, right? And so it really can hamper some things once in a while. If we're looking at that laissez-faire style, you know, this one can work well with very experienced, well-trained, self-directed employees, right? Because that type of leadership draws ideas from the employees. It usually communicates upwards, right, instead of from the top down. It often places responsibility for outcomes on the employees themselves, right? So the laissez-faire can work in certain cases, or we may be able to adapt that laissez-faire leadership style from time to time, depending on what's happening, what those specific situations are in the workplace. So a couple other styles that we can typically look at and see how that works is the social leadership style. It's inclusive and supportive, right? Very participative, I can't say the word, where it's lots of participation from everybody, right? Encourages that creativity, is very supportive and forgiving and upbeat. It's very rewarded oriented. And then the team leadership style, right? Maximizes the employee efforts. It creates that mutual bond of respect and understanding. Involves the employees in the decision making and problem solving, right? So it can also foster that sense of belonging with that team style. Again, does team leadership work in a crisis situation, like for the fire chief when he has to deploy his fire trucks and his firemen out, you know, out to a fire call? You know, to a certain degree, yeah, they have to work together as a team. They have to know what to do to get there and when they get there to the fire. But again, he's not going to stop and ask the whole team, well, what should we do to go on this fire call, right? He's got to make that decision right away. And so he's going to have to take over that authoritative style to get the team there. And then once there, the team takes over in that style. So again, you know, fire chief is probably right there, right along with the other firemen. He's suited up and he's going into the burning building and what have you. So that's where the team leadership style would kick in. Just to give you a little contrast and comparison on that. So there's a big drive and you know, movement out there in our society for the culture of inclusion. And I know you guys have heard a lot about this in recent times, right? So the common pillars for great organizational cultures can include that trust, pride, and enjoyment. So these organizations and companies that are developing and emerging out there are really going to be tuned in to that culture of inclusion, right? So having that servant mindset and approach, cultivating servant leaders that create those cultures where people do feel trusted, where they feel empowered and supported and treated fairly, right? So the overall goal, right, is to try to relinquish that autocratic command and control traditional way of leadership and leverage those employees' potential to achieve that whole system change. I can't overemphasize, you know, building trust within that organization that you run or that you lead. Because if the trust is lost, I think the whole momentum is lost for us. So always setting a good example, you know, do as they expect the employees to do, right? Setting the example, working side by side when we need to work side by side as a team, and taking the heat when the big stuff happens, right? Keeping our commitments. Nothing destroys that trust relationship more than making a promise and not being able to deliver, right? Always tell the truth, even though that may be not a fun thing to do. The truth can be a really tough thing for people to hear, but I think it's always best to establish that credibility by telling the truth. And there's ways that we can approach that and be non-abrasive but very firm about it. And we're going to look at that a little bit later in our program. Being fair, obviously employees need to trust us to have their best interest at heart. And we need to treat people fairly and provide that for them. Now, they may not always like that fair treatment, but they can very, very much identify when there's favoritism going on in the workplace, or maybe there's even the perception of favoritism going on. If we tell the truth, if we're fair in our approach and very consistent in our approach, we can tell them the why behind that and explain that to them so that they understand it's not favoritism. It's, hey, we're complying with the law. I made an accommodation for an employee to come in a little bit later in the mornings. It's a temporary situation until things are taken care of. If you were in the same situation, Mr. Employee, I would do the very same for you if you were faced with the kind of situation that this employee is dealing with right now. So you can be fair and you can explain why you're doing something that might be perceived as favoritism. And then just being able to admit our mistakes, right? I mean, everybody makes mistakes. We're all humans. I think it really shows our peeps that we are human, that we can own our mistakes when we've made an error or done something wrong that created, extra work for everybody or what have you, right? And I think that goes a long ways in our credibility. So there's some basic leadership techniques. Again, I'm sure you guys have seen this before. It's nothing new. The buzzwords of empowerment, motivation, delegation, accountability. What exactly is accountability and how do I do that, right? So they're all the buzzwords that we look at in basic leadership techniques, but hopefully today, I can give you a couple of takeaways for really what these mean and how we can apply these in our daily work life. So with empowerment, again, taking a look at when a good leader's work is done, the employees are going to say, hey, we did this ourselves. It was that empowerment. That's what it's all about. So it's promoting a sense of ownership, and employees really do need to feel like we own our jobs and we're responsible for our performance, right? Encouraging people to take that initiative when that's appropriate, letting them have some autonomy, right? When that's needed, and teaching them when it's appropriate for them to check in with you. They want to take that independent action, but also what's a good boundary? When can they make that decision on their own? When do they need to come to you and just check it off first, right? And just let you know that's what they're doing. So empowerment can involve team action too. So, employees working together to solve problems, make decisions. We're likely to get better results and better motivation if we have that inclusive piece when and where we can with the empowerment piece, right? Oh, can we have the next slide? Sorry. So here's some of the things that we were just talking about, and one of the components is providing excellent training, and so I think as leaders, one of the things that if we're not a natural teacher, I think one of the things that's really great for us to learn is to learn how to teach others, right? provide that training. I mean, a lot of times it's up to you to do the training when we hire somebody new, or we have someone new coming into the organization. And having that ability to pass that along to the other person, right? Sometimes we know how to make the widgets. We know it frontwards and backwards. And it's really hard to break down how to make a widget into 15 easy steps, right? It's so automatic for us that sometimes we forget some of the steps, or we forget some of the specifics that somebody brand new and really green coming into it might not know. So really being aware of providing that training, right? And then on the next slide, we see a couple more components of empowerment, right? Being accessible to folks, letting them know they can come and ask questions, right? Not being afraid to ask questions, not being judged if they think, oh my gosh, this is a dumb question, but I need to ask because I'm not sure, right? Sharing the credit for things well done and the responsibility, right? The credit for the success, but also be prepared to share responsibility for failure. Obviously, we hope that doesn't happen, and you do everything to prevent that. But sometimes we, the whole team, the whole group, may fail to achieve the goals. And then when that happens, we need to let them know we're right by their side. We're sharing in the outcome, and to keep them empowered, recognizing their achievements, right? Rewarding when we do have those achievements out there. And it's not always about the money. I mean, people obviously will never turn down money, but those recognitions can be something that's very straightforward and very easy. Just a simple, hey, thanks, or wow, great job, or that was beautiful, whatever, you know. Recognizing those successes and those achievements helps to empower the folks that are doing the work, right? So motivation, again, another buzzword. You know, what exactly do we do to motivate other folks, right? And it is a cornerstone in effective leadership. You know, as we see here on our menu of items, creating a vision, letting the employee know how they fit into that vision, like what is their role, how are they fitting into that big picture. Being very specific and giving clear direction. This is one of the things that I hear, you know, when there's conflict in the workplace is that, boy, I'm getting confusing directives from different sources. You know, it's kind of, I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. I'm trying to do the right thing, but I'm not getting these clear directions, or I'm getting conflicting directions from different supervisors or different people that are in management, right? We want to have high expectations. We need to set the bar, right? But set it at a reasonable level so they can get to the goal. And then really, you know, being able to evaluate that and set the bar for the next level for them, right? Have their input on what that next level might be. Being consistent, I think, is super, super important for us as leaders, right? Another thing I hear quite a bit of as an HR business partner is, boy, you know, my boss, I'm walking on eggshells. I never know if I'm going to walk in that day at work and they're going to be cranky or they're going to be in a good mood, right? Even something like that, just that emotional piece can really set people off balance. So being very consistent, right, with standards, with behavior, everything is going to set that tone for us in the workplace. And then the last item on our list here, discover and use personal motivators. So finding out what makes people tick, right? I mean, there's always, like I said, you know, the money thing, but that's kind of fleeting, and they spend the money and they forget they got a raise, and, you know, and so we're spending to our limits, as we typically do as humans. And so, you know, what is that internal or that intrinsic motivator that makes that person tick, right? So for some people, it might be a chance for advancement. For others, it might be more support and security, right? For even other people, might be that sense of belonging to a group. And I think that's a huge piece, not feeling like an outsider. If they're part of the group, they have that sense of belonging. That's a huge motivator for them. And we'll see how we can use that later in our program today when we are handling or approaching maybe some challenges with employees as well, right? And looking at that motivation piece. So delegation, again, another big buzzword. And one of the takeaways that I'd like you to have today is that delegation is not dumping, okay? So I'm not going to dump all my, unpleasant tasks onto this person just because I really hate doing them. I hate reconciling the receipts at the end of the day out of the cash register, so I'm going to dump that, Delegation is a different thing. There's some steps to delegation, and there's some planning with it, right? What exactly is it that I can delegate out that I don't need to do myself? Being very specific about defining that. Taking a look at who is the right fit, who's the right person to approach with that and to delegate that task to, right? Do they have the skills? Do they have the time to do that piece of the job, right? And then we want to very carefully explain the task, be very specific, again, breaking down that 15 steps to make the widget, right? Being very specific. And some people may take offense to that and say, oh my gosh, they must think I'm dumb because they're giving me 15 steps to do. But we can, as the leader, we can say, I just want to be very thorough at the beginning to make sure that we don't miscommunicate or that I'm leaving something out that might be important for you to know and to learn, right? Providing that support and feedback as that person starts doing the task or the job. Be observant. Don't be, obviously breathing down their neck the whole time and being a helicopter boss, but at least being observant, checking in, taking a look at how they're coming through the task at different stages of that. Maybe there's some benchmark times where you can check it out. And then lend a helping hand, right, when we need to, and can see that maybe they need a little bit of help here and there. And then the follow-up piece, obviously, hey, they may have done the task a little differently than we would have done it, but was it complete? Was it accurate? Was the end result still there that we needed, right? And again, kind of being a good leader is learning to have a little bit of, I guess, tolerance for other people learning to do the task that we can do it faster, better, more efficiently than someone who's learning the task. But having that tolerance to kind of step back and let them take the time to learn it and let them, plow through it a little bit until they can earn a level of proficiency with it too. Because as they say, to master anything, it takes 10,000 repetitions to do that, to be a master. So maybe not 10,000 in certain things, but that's just an old saying. To master something, it's 10,000 repetitions. So accountability. Again, how do we hold others accountable? Well, we hold ourselves accountable, obviously, to those standards that we set. We hold ourselves to very high expectations, typically, right? We're the business owner. It falls on our shoulders for success or failure. So we have a high level of accountability for ourselves. But how do we convey that to others, right? Making sure that our expectations are really clear. Again, being specific and very clear, and not assuming that they already know what those are, right? Check-ins, weekly check-ins on that. Making sure we offer that assistance and support if a little bit of adjustment is needed, to keep them on the path. The performance evaluation, there's a lot of new thought out there that, doing a big annual, like here's the overall, performance appraisal for this period of time, versus kind of that real-time feedback, on a continuing basis may be a little bit more effective. And we'll drill down on that a little bit later in our program today as well. Again, explaining just where you see the areas for improvement are needed. And again, telling the truth. Don't try to sugarcoat it, right? I think people are more appreciative of a straightforward approach than trying to, you know, trying to massage it, you know, with icing that really doesn't mean anything. So, so again, being the example of accountability, being very clear on what those expectations are, and then doing the check-ins can create that accountability factor that we need. So again, the next thing that we would be looking at as an effective leader is participation, right? You know, supervising by walking around, right? That's a big deal. We can't just hole up with the door closed in our office and not really find out what's going on in the workplace, right? So we need to be visible. We need to be out there with the employees, interacting on a daily basis. Talk to as many people as we can every day. Listen to what their thoughts and their concerns are. And we're going to do a little segment on effective listening today as well. Ask for input, encourage them to share ideas, make suggestions, and so forth. And some employees will have really great ideas, but sometimes they won't share them unless you ask specifically for them to share that, right? Get them involved in that problem solving whenever possible, right? That helps people feel like they're a part of the operations and so forth. Now, one of the things that we can convey as well is you know what, I'm taking your ideas under consideration. These are great. I love it. You know, ultimately, I know there's some things that I'm going to have to decide. The ultimate responsibility lies with me, but absolutely, I welcome, you know, having you share your ideas and your suggestions, and we'll definitely incorporate them when and how we can, right? Encouraging people to speak up at group meetings to give opinions and share things that they might have expertise on. It helps build on everybody else's ideas, and it reinforces that participation piece of it too. And I think the other component of encouraging people to speak up in groups is that safety in the environment, right? Having a safe place to express ourselves and not feeling like we're going to be, you know, counterattacked or judged or put down, you know, because we've suggested something or you know, piped up about that in a group meeting, okay? So we're going to talk a little bit about those ground rules and what that looks like when we're together as a group. So hopefully everybody's doing okay out there. We got just a couple other pieces that we wanted to talk about in this leadership segment. And again, the feedback piece is making it timely, that real-time feedback right after the observed behavior or the event that prompts your feedback is really key with this. And I call that the getting rid of the cottage cheese syndrome. So the longer we leave the cottage cheese on the counter and don't address it, the more it's going to stink, right? So that timely feedback, that very specific, being able to identify you know, what was done well, what needs improvement, and that kind of thing is going to be key for keeping us up and running. So explaining why it's important for the employee to follow your directions, right, or your instructions. Again, asking for their input, you know, that's appropriate, involving that two-way communication. Do they have any questions? Did I explain it okay? Is there anything else we need to go over again? Are you good to go, right? I mean, just asking simple questions like that can be a lifesaver. And then limiting the feedback to one issue at a time. I think this is a pitfall that we tend to fall into sometimes. And, you know, we kind of let things build up a little bit. Again, that cottage cheese syndrome. It's like, yeah, you know, here's what I'm observing now, but oh yeah, then there was this, and this that I really didn't like that they were doing. So don't give them a laundry list of issues, right? Keep it to that one issue at a time. If we do need to address something else, we could mention it. We could say, hey, I do want to talk with you about this other piece, but that's for another day. We're not going to even worry about that today. I just want you to focus on this, okay? following up again, that's our mantra, with leadership. Don't let it drop. Don't let things fall through the cracks. Making sure that we're circling back around and following with some additional feedback. Whether, hey, it's a non-issue now, right? Everything's good. So leading teams, I would venture to guess that most of us as leaders didn't really consciously say, hey, I'm going to be leading a team now. It just kind of happens and evolves over time. But there's a couple of components that we want to pay attention to, right? When we're leading a team. Creating that atmosphere of safety, like I mentioned before, right? Where people feel comfortable. We have the mutual bonding and so forth that encourages different points of view. And we know that people are going to have different viewpoints within the workplace. We come from different backgrounds, different values, different upbringings, right? That's kind of that melting pot for us in the workplace. Setting goals, we're really drilling on that today. Setting goals and being very clearly defined with that helps build that commitment. Encouraging, the participation, as I mentioned before. Asking for somebody's cooperation if we need to, right? Just come right out and say, hey, I need to have you cooperate with this. This is really important. Great phrase to use in appropriate times, right? Maintain that communication, and we'll look at communication pieces here in just a few minutes. Dealing with conflict effectively, which is going to be the third part of our webinar today, and we're going to wrap up with that in about the last half hour, 45 minutes of our webinar. So again, there's going to be disagreements about the methods of doing things, right? But we need to take that discussion and sort it out and be able to come to a common solution or agreement how we're going to proceed that everybody can live with, right? So that's one of the qualities of being able to lead a good team. Disagreements dealt with promptly before it damages the team's cohesiveness and the unity. So leading in times of change, well, my word, talk about times of change, in this last couple months. It's been a roller coaster. I don't need to, belabor that point at all. It takes that resiliency that we need to have to be able to roll with those changes, right? Being able to value that change, like looking for the nuggets of here's some things that have developed because of the change that we could maybe capitalize on in our business, right? But just know that most people really kind of fear and resist change, right? That's just a human condition. We don't really like the unknown. I know what I know, and that gives me this level of familiarity that I rely on. So helping others know that change can be a positive force can help to belay some of that nervousness about the change, right? Being as transparent as we can with change. We can't always share all the information about that coming change with the employees at all times. There's certain things because of confidentiality or negotiating client contracts or something that we can't say right away with our employees. But we can say, hey, I'm sharing with you all the information and being as transparent as I can, for what I can do right now. And at the appropriate time, I'll fill you in on these other things, right? So let them know that you are thinking of that and that you are being transparent with them. As a leader, we have to develop an appetite for change and challenges, right? So it introduces a whole bunch of new situations and problems into ours and the employees' jobs. So we take up that challenge and we just get really persistent in overcoming those obstacles. And then obviously we're going to help others, become accustomed to that change. A lot of times as leaders too, we know a change is coming because we've already thought about it. We've already negotiated it. We've got to a completion with it. We've processed through it through a period of time. and then we blindside the employees with the change. Like, here it is, good luck with that. So just realizing that that employees as humans, we do need to be able to process through that idea of change. A lot of times we're way further down the road in front of the employees in our thought processes and our acceptance of the change than they are, right? If they're hearing it for the first time, give them a little bit of leeway, give them some flexibility to understand the change and process through it. And then being a lifelong learner, obviously there's always opportunities to learn new things, and we've had to be on our feet and ready to learn new and different ways, just like these Zoom meetings, right, to interact. So it's fun, it's challenging, and like I said, being a good leader, developing an appetite for those changes, right? Not shrinking from it, but just meeting it head on, I think is just a super good quality of being a leader. So all of that can play into the culture of the organization. Absolutely. We influence our organizational culture in so many ways. But the key points to remember, in this component today that we're talking about, we're skillful in our leadership, right? We have to learn that. We're not just born with it. We need to practice and manage that as well. Building our skills to help us motivate others, right? Becoming that guide, that mentor, that teacher, right, to help workers perform at their best. And then developing, right, that loyalty with our employees and they make contributions to our organization, being able to acknowledge those contributions and encourage more, right? But building that loyalty, I think, is super good for us as well. And we're gonna talk a little bit about what that influence looks like. Okay, so with that, we are just about to the end of our first hour, and I just wondered if anyone in our audience had any questions for me on the leadership component today. Do we have any questions in our chat, Kayla?
Nope, we don't have any. We don't have any in our chat. So if anyone does have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or speak up, and we would be happy to get that question answered for you as well. So
awesome, perfect. So yes, so again, influencing our organizational culture. So here's a couple of things to think about in how we can influence that as leaders. Being observant, right? Listen as much as we can and speak little. Just making sure that we're paying attention to what's happening. Balancing the subcultures with our organizational unity, right? So we were all in high school once, and once we break into the professional world, it's kind of hard to shake the tendency to make fast friends and divide ourselves into smaller groups within the larger whole. But as leaders, we can see the team building opportunities within these subgroups, right? And yet at the same time being able to encourage more inter-team cooperation. We don't get hung up on titles, right? We can have a flatter company structure. Sometimes our leaders come from surprising places. They're not necessarily the appointed leaders, right? But they have a skill set that we can really capitalize on. So being observant of that, right? Being active in our community can really affect our influence on our culture, right? There's lots of workers that are so community-minded and cause-minded. Absolutely, we want to be a part of that. Helping employees fully understand their roles, we drilled on that today quite a bit. Developing their skills, having that ownership in the job. And this is a really important one, looking beyond productivity, right? So, obviously an important job as a leader is to encourage results without making our teams feel like spokes in a wheel or gears in a profit-making machine. So where's the heart? Where's the heart of the work, right? Where's the passion for the work? And then just talking to employees like they're human beings, right? So here's some of the things that employees really want. And I think this is really interesting to take a look at what employees want from work, right? They want a sense of community. They want to, have a career, have some meaningful work and have an influence in their work life as well, right? So one of the sayings that Richard Branson once said is that train people well enough so they can leave, but treat them well enough so they don't want to leave, right? So that's part of it. That sense of community, that sense of belonging, right, is so key for us to connect with the employees in those ways. We put that culture on the line with that connection. Being able to support and plan activities that support our emotional, financial, and physical well-being, right? Very, very key for us. And then employees a lot of times are looking for the cause. What's the greater picture, right? Great cultures are rooted in great stories. So having that emotional connection of the story, how did the company come to be? How did we think up how to make those widgets? Where did that come from, right? And a lot of our entrepreneurs come from, it's built on a family business, right? The principals are family. So ask employees about a day when they felt like they made a difference at work, right? Just ask them, come out and find out. Ask those questions. Where are they coming from, right? What did they like most about working there? What do they like least? So it's almost like the stay interviews, right? Taking the time to visit with that employee one-on-one. Would you recommend working here to a friend, right? Do we have a referral piece that we can use within our company, right? Surveying our staff. Sometimes employee surveys can bring out some very important feedback and information that they may be hesitant to share at other times, right? But making sure we're very focused on what we want to find out with that survey is very key as well. So getting a resource that can help us figure out what are the questions we really want to ask and find out from employees. Another thing that we can do to find out what employees really want is to shadow our staff, right? There might be parts of a person's job that they might not think to mention, but it could be a significant source of aggravation or stress for them. So spending time alongside them, right? Watching the hurdles that they have to clear to do their job, that can give you some insights as well. And then one of the other ways we can learn what employees really want is learn from the new hire, right? Or even the departing employee. What can we learn from them as to what prompted them to leave our organization? So again, you can see, I mean, this is pretty common sense stuff. We want the adequate resources to be able to do our jobs right. Having some autonomy, having the ability to be safe enough to share ideas and solve problems, being consulted, right, when they're going to be affected by the decisions. I think that is a huge piece of what employees want to have. It's this, gosh, management made the decision and they just, handed it down to us without even, asking how we're going to be affected by it, right? Again, we're asking for input. We need to know what to do with that input. We're asking the employees for that input, and being fair and objective about that, and being transparent again about why we made the decision that we made, okay? So a little bit about what employees really want. I think it's really fascinating to take a look at that and to read a little bit about what employees want. For our participants today, I'd like to share some of the articles and the resources that I used for this too, not just the slide presentation. So Kayla, I'll send those over to you if you can distribute that with our participants today. That'd be awesome. So it kind of goes back to creating a culture of dialogue, right? This all just dials into the communication piece. So when I think of culture, I think of it as the petri dish. What's growing inside that dish or that controlled environment? Is it the penicillin, you know, that helps save lives, or is it something toxic that is just going to continue to grow and you know, invade our culture within our environment? So so again, it's, you know, it's pervasive, it's going to grow. How do we want to grow that culture? And then dialogue, right? That's that ongoing two-way communication that we're going to drill into here in a few minutes. And then how to create that culture of dialogue. And I kind of referred to this earlier, is, you know, making a very intentional effort on a regular basis to have that check-in conversation with that other person privately, giving them your full attention. That helps them feel valued and important, right? That you're actually taking the time to just visit with them one-on-one. And again, some of us have tons of people that directly report to us, and we think, oh my word, if I'm meeting with each and every person this often, I'm never going to get the work done, right? But we'll see what those benefits are if we take just that little check-in time with those folks on a regular basis. So the other thing I kind of wanted to touch on in this segment is you know, the engagement and retention piece. So it kind of starts right at the very beginning in hiring the right people, right? How do we approach that? Are we so desperate to have a live body that we kind of skip over some of the things that we might really need to find out about, right? Explaining specifically what the job is. What does a day in a life of look like, right, for this position? We're going to look for a good fit, but we also want to make sure that we're asking questions that tell us how they performed on previous jobs, because that's our best gauge of how they're going to perform on the job for us, right? Lots of questions. Get the other person, get that job candidate to talk, right? And making sure that we ask lots of questions about that. Making sure we are very clear about expectations early on, getting them off to a good start, right? So hiring the right people, getting off to a good start. How do we onboard folks when they first come in? You know, is it, hey, we're glad you're here. Here's the apron, you know, go to work, right? We want to make sure that we've got some kind of an onboarding plan, right? Are they going to shadow somebody else so that they can see how the widgets are made, you know, for a couple days or a week? Doing those brief and very frequent check-ins at the very beginning. And I'm such a big proponent of putting that effort in on the front end makes a lower maintenance employee on the back end, right? So as we're going through onboarding and orientation, letting them know what the roadmap is, what's the rules of the road here for working here, and what's some of the unwritten things, like, you know, don't want to park in somebody's parking spot, you know, that's been here for 20 years and things like that. So give them a heads up about the unwritten rules as well. Having an open door so they can come and ask questions about things, you know, as they're learning the job, as they're, you know, getting acclimated to the work group and so forth, right? They're brand new to that work group, and they're going to be a little nervous about that as well. So getting that teamwork, getting them involved with the coworkers and that group is some key ingredients for them to stay engaged. And the statistics say that typically a new hire is going to make that decision whether to go or stay within the first couple of weeks of employment. So that's kind of our little window of opportunity to integrate them into our organization and help them have a positive experience with us, right? So getting them off to a good start, very, very big deal. And the next thing that we're going to do, and this is, I think, the primary obligation for any employer is to provide a safe and healthy work environment, right? That is the number one obligation for any employer. And obviously we've seen, we've seen the escalation in that with precautions, you know, with keeping people at work or reopening our organizations again. So, so again, that big deal. If employees know that they can be safe at work, we're going to have less turnover there, right? Employees know that other people aren't going to be impaired when they come to work and maybe putting them at risk, you know? So it's essential, right, to have those practices and policies in place, making sure we're enforcing that safety piece too. We need to be protected from things that could cause us harm, right? And when these protections are lacking, employees are going to move on. They're going to be looking for something else at the first chance they get, right? So that's one of the big keys for onboarding folks and helping them to integrate into our workplaces. So the next slide kind of recaps everything that we spent our first hour on today, right? Providing leadership and direction. And so again, having those clear goals, defining things very specifically, setting up those limits, explaining the policies and the rules of the road that we live by. That fairness and consistency again is re-emphasized here. And then the last line that you see here, deal with complaints promptly. If they're left unattended, that one employee's complaint can spread discontent to everybody else. It can grow that negative work environment in the petri dish, and then you've got a wildfire on your hands. So listen to complaints, no matter how trivial it might sound to you, either offering a solution if we can, or get the complainer involved in, you know, well, what do you feel would be a good solution for this? Get them into that problem solving mode as well. Sometimes employees will come to us and they think, well, if I give my boss this complaint, I'm done with it. They're going to have to deal with it, right? So don't let that monkey get on your back when it's not really truly your monkey, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about complaints and conflict in the later portion of our webinar today. So challenging employees, I'm going to go through these next slides fairly quickly because I think we really kind of drilled on that in the very first half of our webinar today. Challenging employees, you know, obviously keeping them interested in the job. You know, people are looking for meaningful work, you know, delegating that autonomy whenever we can and so forth, and encouraging them to take initiative. Now, some employees won't have initiative and they just want it chunked down into steps for them, and that's okay. I need the worker bees. I need someone that's just going to plod along there, right? But knowing who can be challenged and who's wanting to just be a worker bee is a big distinction for us as leaders. The next slide talks about cross-training, right? So if we don't have, if we're not big enough to offer like lots of advancement within the company itself, cross-training gives people a variety of new experiences, and it really kind of encourages growth. It helps to shift the workplace when we have absenteeism, helps them to change it up a little bit, mix it up instead of having that same old routine all the time. Now, one of the things you need to be prepared for if you're going to cross-train is the question, and well, am I going to get paid what Joe gets paid when I'm doing his job? Okay, so we need to have an adequate response for that too. You know, taking away the barriers, you know, to performance. You know, obviously we have to do whatever we can, right, to make sure that employee that takes on a new challenge is going to be successful. Providing opportunities is the next slide. We've already talked about that, the training and coaching. Promotions when we can promote. Letting them practice, you know, being a team lead, just to walk in those shoes and see if it's something that they really want to do. Or giving them a special assignment. So if we don't really have the ability to promote people throughout the organization, to climb the ladder, so to speak, you know, the responsibility piece, the special assignments, can be an interesting way to mix that up for them. And then the next slide about offering constructive feedback. I think we've really kind of drilled on this pretty well today, right? We want to reinforce positive behavior. So feedback, in positive ways too, what they're, catch them doing things right, and being able to acknowledge that and really kind of draw that out. If they have necessary changes that they need to make sure we give examples or demonstrate what we mean, right? And taking advantage of that real-time feedback piece. And then at the very end of this piece is talking about promoting open communication, and we're going to see a little bit about that in our next part, our part 2, right? How do we actively listen to someone's concerns? How to encourage that interaction and manage the conflict, right? We know that conflict is a normal aspect of our work relationship, and so being able to address that and work through differences and find those mutually agreeable solutions that everybody can walk out of the room with and live with, right? Recognizing achievement is our next slide that talks about, again, finding out what makes people tick. What is it that they want to be rewarded or acknowledged for, right? What is it that they just get excited about? Celebrating group success as well, right? And maybe you can fashion your organization to reward that group success, right? If the whole company does good, all the employees get a share in that. And I think that's pretty key too for small business owners, right? We maybe only have a couple of employees, but if we can share in that group success, and kind of, spread that back to the employee base, that's a great way to do it as well. And I know some of you are thinking, oh my gosh, I put in 70, 80 hours a week to make this business run, and they get to go home, after their shift. But remember, they're doing their part too to make that successful. So the next slide, offering support and supervision. Obviously, we need to be observant, right? Provide that guidance when we need to. Help employees learn from their mistakes, right? Being tolerant of them making some mistakes once in a while. But it builds that stronger bond between you and the workers, right? Knowing that they kind of have that latitude, but yet we're still going to set that bar. We're still going to set the standards that they need to achieve, right, as they practice and get better at what they're doing. And then that last line, I think, is just super important. Sticking up for our peeps, right? Run interference for them when you have to. Support them in their dealings with others, right? You'll have their backs. And that's going to create that loyalty that we talked about a little bit earlier. Most of them are likely going to return that loyalty back to you if you're sticking up for them, okay? And again, we might be getting complaints from customers or something like that, and we need to just investigate and really see what actually happened. Give the employee a chance to explain their perspective of what that incident or that event was, okay? What else do we have here? Next slide is providing sufficient resources. I think this is a duplicate of a slide that we had earlier, but I like it. I like to refer to it as the 3 T's: providing the training, the time, and the tools for the employee to do the job and do it right and efficiently. Okay, so having those 3 T's in place for our employees is super, super big. So a couple just last comments on our last slides here. Remaining flexible, being able to roll with the punches, right? Try not to make employees choose between their work and their personal lives, creating that balance or keeping that balance as much as we possibly can, capitalizing on the diversity that we have in our workplaces, and then, helping employees to accept change so that they can thrive in that environment. As long as they know they've got your support and guidance, They're going to be so much better about accepting that change. The last couple slides, this next one, responding positively to challenging workers. And we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail here in about 15 minutes for the last part or third part of our webinar today. But I really like this slide because it really kind of lays out what my roadmap is with this. Explain my concerns. So for example, I noticed you're having conflicts with a number of your coworkers. What do you think the problem is? What do you think we can do to resolve these problems, right? Give specific examples. Things like in today's meeting, you brought up possible problems before I finished explaining the plan. So again, being very specific about what our concerns are. If we offer suggestion, an example, if the employee is always late finishing an assignment, try to find out why. Offer suggestions to help that employee meet the work deadlines. We want to avoid criticizing or judging, right? Get rid of the blame game, focus just on the problems, not the personality, and being calm, right? Don't get that emotion in there, and staying focused on the subject. Don't let that person run you down a rabbit trail, right? Just stay focused on what that issue is at that point. Being firm, right? Being firm with your statements. You've missed your last 3 deadlines. Can you explain why this is happening? Or please explain why this is happening. Be willing to help solve the problem, but get them involved in that problem-solving process, and then having an action plan when you leave the room. We want to, this next slide talks about considering the employee side of the story. So giving them a chance to talk about, you know, what they're concerned about. They might have a legitimate complaint. We don't know, right? They might be experiencing some stress off the job, which is highly probable in the environment that we're in this last couple months. So let them have the ability to express those things, and then listening very closely for what those underlying concerns might be. What's the root cause of their dissatisfaction? And then we have, as I mentioned just a minute ago, focus on the problems, not the personalities. And this is an important step for us to take. We need to back it up, slow it down, look at the behavior or the problem, right? Identify what that is. Think solely in terms of the job, not the person, right? And this last piece that says, write yourself a report, this is where I get all the emotion out before I actually talk to the person. So I'm going to have my papers divided into 2 parts. On the left side, I'm going to write everything down that makes me mad about what that person's doing. And on the right side, I'm going to write down the facts. Well, this is what's happening. This is why it's not acceptable, right? So I at least get that emotion out, and then I can focus on just the objective facts. And after you write up your T-sheet and write everything down that you're mad about, make sure you shred it, because people are very curious also. And if we leave it laying on our desk, they're going to want to read it, right? So the third step in this process on the next slide talks about looking before we leap. Okay, so in other words, before we take action, let's consider, right? Let's give a fair hearing. Let them express what they need to express as well. We need to investigate all the facts from every angle that we can possibly look at. Follow our procedures. Be very consistent on how we're following protocol. And then looking at the evidence. Was there safety violations? Was there some kind of, something that in that complaint that we need to, make sure we run intervention and have the behavior stop, right? And then, as we talked about earlier in one of our other slides, to follow up on our next slide here, it's making sure that we come full circle when we are, addressing the complaints, the behaviors, the problems that have been identified, right? If there's some remaining issues, that haven't been cleared up yet, we want to continue to monitor that and see what kind of progress or lack of progress is being made with it, okay?